Ready? Okay, an unusual summer. Towards the end of my first round-the-world trip in 1993, I received a telephone call from my neighbor in Florida. She asked how much longer I was staying and could I take care of her mother. Mother spent the winters in Boynton Beach with her daughter Trudy, and in the summer they would reverse and daughter would spend the summer in Germany with Mutti. It seemed the mother had developed Alzheimer's or some form of dementia, which was first observed by neighbors after her dog died. Later, her bank called Trudy and asked if she knew of any reason why her mother would be withdrawing 1,000 marks a day from the bank. This got her attention and she flew on the next flight to investigate. After consultation with neighbors, friends, and the doctor, it was determined Betty, her mother's name, should not be left alone and required some live-in help. I had never done anything like that and demurred. Nor did I think I knew enough German to communicate with her mother who spoke no English. Based on the few words of German Trudy and I had exchanged, she seemed to think I could. She totally overlooked the fact that I had no experience whatsoever with dementia. And so did I guess. I came home a few weeks later, it was March, and I had an opportunity to meet Betty face to face. She seemed like a nice old lady, she was 87, but I was unable to form an opinion. However, Trudy thought it would work, and in May, I went to Germany with both of them. They lived in a town called Hersching am Ammersee. In German, a lake is a See, which was the focus of the area. High above, but within walking distance, was a monastery named Kloster Andechs. The first weekend after my arrival, I noticed groups of 100 or more people walking up the mountain, sometimes accompanied by a couple of nuns or a priest. Or when I inquired what that was all about, Trudy told me with a straight face they were pilgrims on their way to the cluster. Trudy told me, I thought at that time the South Germans must be pretty religious folk. Much later, I learned that the monks made about the best beer in Germany, as well as great bread and cheese, and they had a big Ratskeller to enjoy it in. The commuter train from Munich took about an hour, and the hike up to the cluster was a half an hour, and then another half hour down. By the time the train got back to the city of Munich, the participants were relatively sobered up. There was also a beautiful little Baroque chapel, lest one think I impugn base motives to all. Trudy went home to face back surgery, and I faced my new challenge. My job was to shop, cook 3 meals a day, and take care of this lady as best I could, with a half a day off a week when the cleaning lady came. At first, Betty was fearful and suspicious of me, and acted up in strange ways. In the beginning of our relationship, she was sometimes out of control. Some of it was a power trip, but most, I believe, was out of fear. One episode had her locking herself in her room and calling for help out her window, which attracted the neighbors, all of whom had known her for years. This was particularly embarrassing for me, as I had no idea how to handle this. The veterinarian who lived downstairs came up, and she found some tranquilizers, of which she persuaded Betty to take 1/2. She went to sleep then, but woke the next morning hungover and mean as a snake. She played games. She hid her money or her purse and would enlist me to help her find it. And when I did, accused me of stealing and hiding it. After a while, I realized it was a game and I told her I would no longer play. The really tragic part of this disease is that she had been a substantial citizen all her life, had her own business, had her own house built and paid for. She personally created 2 beautiful tile murals on her house, one of St. George and the Dragon and on the back wall, and some of the saint on the front wall. The paintings on the walls were also hers. She raised her daughter alone. Her husband never returned from the war and was listed as missing. Therefore, she never received a pension. For so long, she had held her world up by herself, and now she was reduced to having to have help. And when she was in reality, she knew all of this. So it must have been extremely frustrating for her to find herself in that position. There were times when we could converse as 2 intelligent adults, with me gently reminding her to speak in Hochdeutsch when she lapsed into Bavarian, which was the local speech. I was busy enough relearning German. I was not up to an additional dialect. It is essentially another language, and most North Germans will not make the effort to learn it and do not understand it. Besides, all children learn High German in school. Thus, she was able to make the switch, usually. Her dreams seemed to be carried over into her waking hours. It usually took her several hours to come down to some semblance of reality. Some mornings she told me the Kaiser and his court were coming, and I needed to get ready. Once she looked at the front of my shirt, which had a fancy decoration, and asked me to turn around. And she said the front was fine, but for the back we would have to call a tailor. Another morning, she woke up and thought she was still a little girl. I showed her what she had in the closet, and she couldn't find her school clothes. And she cried, "These clothes are for adults, they're not mine." Another morning, she was crying, real tears. "I can't find my leg." She had put both legs into one pant leg and couldn't figure it out. When I helped her get her leg out, she was so grateful. Every day was a new adventure, not only for Betty, but surely also for me. One night, there was a tremendous thunderstorm which woke me up. I went to check on Betty because her light was on. A neighbor had removed the lock from her door after the window calling incident, but she had managed to push a heavy professional hair dryer from her former beauty shop against the door. Since she was quiet, I, not wanting to inspire another drama, went back to bed. The next morning, she told me she had heard men going up and down the stairs all night long to see me, and that she would not tolerate that kind of a business in her house. I said, "Betty, I've had a few good men in my life, but none were good enough to make the lightning strike and the thunder sound anything like what we had last night." And that was the end of that. There were times she had me wondering if her dementia wasn't to put on. And then, and most other times, I knew better. Her ability to switch back and forth was a cause for wonderment. Several times she was aware she had gone off and said to me, "Ich binne," which means loosely that she realized she was out of her mind for a time. When her friends and relatives visited, she was unfailingly courteous and seemingly normal. In Germany, visitors always bring cake and visit mostly in the afternoon. So all I really had to do was to supply coffee or tea. This was generally a semi-formal affair with the best china, the lump sugar in the fancy sugar bowl, and the creamer full. Betty showed me and I followed easily. The guests were all nice people. One day she got cousin Hildegard into the purse hunting game. That was after I had resigned from it. I said nothing and let it play out. Most Saturdays we went across the street to Frau Neuner's house. These ladies had been neighbors for 40 years, over 40 years, and they were still Frau Neuner and Frau Hoffmann. And I understand it used to be like that in the United States, but that was before my time. For a while, Betty was talking about dying. She told me that she was ready to die and felt useless. If she appeared to be dying, I was to call no one and leave her be. One morning, she did not get up. I called her for breakfast, but she said she could not get up. I checked her breathing, felt her face for temperature. Everything seemed to be normal. Checking her frequently, I left her and prepared dinner, which was the noon meal. Dinner time came and she said she still was unable to come. I asked if she wanted to eat in bed. No, she was not able. Now I was wondering whether to call the doctor or Trudy or what. I called my daughter Linda, who was living in Germany at the time, and conferred with her. Told her I had a theory that Betty might be thinking if she sleeps long enough, maybe she would go into the long sleep. Also mentioned that she'd been up 3 times to visit the bathroom and seemed to be walking just fine. We decided to wait until supper time and then take some action if necessary. And shortly after, Betty appeared, up and dressed. So she had dinner at 2:15 in the afternoon and supper at the usual time. I had a sense that she felt she had missed something and of resignation. If willing herself to die didn't work, she would have to make the best of her situation. No alarms were called and peace reigned. Thinking about it later, I decided this might have been a test because she seemed to trust me more after that. After supper, Betty watched TV. She had her favorite programs and seemed to be more in touch with reality in the evenings. She was aware of household sounds downstairs and in the street, and I determined this was a good time for me to go out for a couple of hours. I would tell her when I would return and made it my business to be back on time. Usually I would walk down to the lake, which had families out for their evening strolls. Lots of children, soccer players, boaters. Once I watched a young man trying sailboarding. I don't know how many times he got dumped, but he always got up again and made another attempt. And that water seemed cold to me. Earlier in the day, since the town was around the lake, I could see this. Children would go swimming. Those under 5 were suitless. The older ones wore bathing suits. And as I walked along, I found Canada geese. And I learned that the geese had a nursery for their goslings, and usually 2 or 3 females supervised. The rest of the flock was elsewhere feeding. There were swans as well. They did not like people. And that was pretty much it for wildlife, except for squirrels, who were as busy there as anywhere. I am not sure how the Canada geese wound up there. I was told that all the native birds were eaten after the war, and that these were imports. I have no idea if this is true. I was there for 4 months. I recaptured my long-lost German. I signed up for a German for Foreigners course. Gertrude Neuner asked me why. My German was just fine, she said. And I told her I knew my grammar was really off. And she said, so what? If you make a little error, es ist charmant. She gave me confidence in my conversations. And ever after that, I tried never to speak English in Germany. I became acquainted with this beautiful town and some of its people. Of the current population of approximately 10,000, 1,000 were Croatians settling in. This is 10% of the population. I believe they were sent there because of a common Catholic belief system. A lot of locals were unhappy about the number of foreigners and their habits, which were not as civilized as theirs. Sound familiar? During the war, when the population was only 1,000, 10% of 101 of the men of Helsing were killed, and that's not counting those who simply did not return, especially those sent to Russia. They were not listed on the plaque in the town square. Towards the end of my employment period, Betty had now come to trust me because she learned that I do what I say I will do. Life was easier for me and surely for Betty. Now she didn't want her daughter to come. She was afraid of her, thought she hated her. Trudy yelled at her. This I knew to be true, having heard that more than once. And she wanted me to stay. So now we were friends. She tried to enlist me as an ally against her daughter. This I was not going to do. Again, fear of the unknown was difficult for her. I learned, sometimes she would become angry and rail against any little thing. I learned to walk away, realizing this was out of frustration. She would realize she was out of line and apologize. It must have been so difficult for her to accept that she was no longer in control of her life, as it would be for me. In the end, I learned that this formidable woman still was always a lady, and I respected and loved her. The end.
Very nice. Thank you, Charlotte.
You're welcome.